Welcome back. Grab your favorite mug. Hopefully, it isn't filled with anything we are about to discuss today. The United Kingdom has historically been a nation of tea drinkers. The image of the British daily routine is usually accompanied by a delicate cup of Earl Grey or a sturdy builder's brew. But in the last 20 years, something shifted fundamentally. The third wave of coffee crashed onto our shores. We transformed from a country of tea leaves to a nation obsessed with flat whites, single-origin pour-overs, and oat milk lattes. We have become more discerning, more demanding, and more caffeinated than ever before. But here's the harsh reality. Not all coffee is created equal. For every artisan roaster in Shoreditch or Manchester carefully selecting beans from high-altitude farms in Ethiopia, there are industrial giants turning out brown sludge that barely qualifies as coffee. Today, we are diving deep into the dark underbelly of the UK coffee scene. We're looking at the burnt, the bitter, the weak, and the chemically processed. We have compiled a definitive list of the 9 worst UK coffee brands, ranging from the dusty instant granules lurking in the back of your grandmother's cupboard to the high street giants that charge you £5 for a cup of hot milk and burnt sugar. These are the brands that rely on nostalgia, aggressive marketing, or sheer convenience to sell you a subpar product. Now, before the caffeine withdrawals kick in and you get defensive, let's be clear. Taste is subjective. If you absolutely love these brands, that is perfectly fine. Drink what makes you happy. But based on consumer reviews, bean quality, roasting processes, and the opinions of coffee experts, these are the offenders that consistently score the lowest. We're judging this through the lens of quality. We are talking about chemical aftertastes, over-roasted beans used to mask defects, and processing methods that strip away every ounce of natural flavor. So, buckle up. We're about to brew some serious controversy. To understand why these brands made the list, we first need to understand what makes them so bad in the first place. Let's get started. Before we name and shame the specific offenders, we need to establish the ground rules. Why are these brands on the list? We aren't just being mean or snobbish, we are judging based on 3 specific pillars of coffee quality that objectively determine whether a cup is liquid gold or dishwater. First, we have to talk about the bean itself. There are 2 main species of coffee beans you need to know about, Arabica and Robusta. Arabica is the premium stuff. It is grown at high altitudes, it is harder to farm, but it delivers complex flavors, acidity, fruitiness, and sweetness. Robusta, on the other hand, is the hardy low-altitude bean. It is much cheaper to grow and has double the caffeine content. That sounds great, right? Wrong. The trade-off is flavor. Robusta is widely known to taste like burnt rubber, wet cardboard, or heavy earth. Many of the brands we are about to discuss rely heavily on cheap Robusta filler to keep their prices low and their profit margins high. The second pillar is the roast. You can take a decent bean and absolutely ruin it by burning it. This is a common trick in the mass market coffee industry, known as over-roasting. If a company buys low-quality beans that have defects, maybe they're moldy, unripe, or inconsistent, they can't roast them lightly or you would taste those bad notes. So they incinerate them. They roast the beans until they are oily and black. This masks the defects, but it replaces them with a singular, overwhelming taste of charcoal and ash. If your coffee tastes like an ashtray, it is not strong or bold. It is simply burnt. The third pillar is the processing. This applies specifically to the instant coffee we will be looking at. There is a right way and a wrong way to make instant coffee. The better method is freeze drying, which preserves some aromatic oils. The cheaper, nastier method is spray drying. This involves spraying liquid coffee into hot air, turning it into dust almost instantly. It effectively cooks the flavor right out of it, leaving behind the brown powder that dissolves quickly but leaves a metallic, synthetic tang on your tongue. So, keeping those criteria in mind, the bean, the roast, and the processing, let's step into the aisle of doom. We are going to start with a brand that represents a bygone era, a relic that somehow still survives on supermarket shelves despite tasting like absolute nothingness. Coming in at number 1, we have a brand that feels less like a beverage and more like a history lesson. It is a relic of the past that many of you might remember from the cupboards of the 1970s and 80s. That brand is Mellow Birds. For a long time, the marketing slogan here was "Mellow Birds will make you smile." But in the modern age, it is much more likely to make you grimace. Mellow Birds sits in a very specific category of coffee that barely legally qualifies as such. If you look closely at the jar, you will often see it marketed not as pure coffee, but as a coffee blend. In the food industry, that word blend is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It usually means the jar is a mixture of very low-grade coffee beans and chicory or other carbohydrate-based fillers used to bulk it out and keep the price dangerously low. The texture of Mellow Birds is the first warning sign. It isn't a granule, it is a fine, light brown powder. This is the hallmark of that aggressive spray drying process we mentioned earlier. Because it is a powder with a massive surface area, it oxidizes incredibly quickly. By the time you peel back that foil seal, the contents have likely been stale for months. When you add water, it dissolves instantly, not because of quality, but because there is no structural integrity left. The taste profile is often described by critics as watery dust. It completely lacks the punch of caffeine you need to wake up in the morning, and it misses the mark on the rich, roasted flavor you want for enjoyment. Instead, it offers a weak, brownish water with a lingering, metallic, almost synthetic aftertaste. This brand represents an era when the UK didn't know better. It is the coffee equivalent of boiling gray vegetables until they mush. It exists today almost entirely on nostalgia. If you are served this at a friend's house, they are either trying to get rid of a jar they bought 20 years ago, or they don't value your friendship very highly. It is a harsh start to our list, but unfortunately, we're only going to get more aggressive from here. Moving on from the weak and watery, we have to talk about the harsh and abrasive. Moving on to number 2, and this entry is going to upset a lot of people because it is arguably the most popular coffee in the entire country. It is the absolute staple of every builder's tea break, every budget hotel room, and every grim office kitchenette across the United Kingdom. We are talking about Nescafé Original, specifically the red jar. Now, we need to make a very important distinction here. Nescafé Gold? That is freeze-dried. It is passable, it has a smoother, rounder flavor, but the standard flagship original red jar is the undisputed king of spray-dried disappointment. Why is it on the worst list? Because of the sheer aggression of the taste profile. Nescafé Original is renowned for its incredibly high acidity and overwhelming bitterness. This is almost exclusively a Robusta-heavy blend, processed rapidly for mass consumption. The goal here isn't flavor. The goal is shelf life and volume. When you crack open the seal of a fresh jar, you don't get that lovely, warm, roasted coffee aroma that fills the room. Instead, you get a sharp chemical whiff that hits the back of your nose. It smells industrial. When you add hot water, the granules dissolve into a black, oily liquid that has a tendency to coat the tongue. Coffee snobs often refer to this as survival juice. It is the kind of drink you consume purely because you need to force your eyes open for a 6 a.m. shift, not because you are looking for a pleasurable sensory experience. It is harsh, it is astringent, and it leaves a distinct stale aftertaste that lingers in your mouth for hours. This is the specific coffee that convinced an entire generation of British people that they need 2 sugars and a lot of milk just to drink coffee. If you have to heavily dilute and sweeten a beverage just to make it palatable, you have to ask yourself, is it actually good? It is the definition of functional caffeine delivery over quality. It might be an icon of the British cupboard, but in terms of what coffee should actually taste like, it is a primary offender. And while this one is too bitter, our next entry swings wildly in the other direction, into something that is barely coffee at all. Number 3 is a bit of a curveball. We are stepping away from the granules and the freeze-dried jars for a moment to look at something that isn't solid at all. It is a thick, dark syrup that comes in a distinct bottle, often featuring a very old-fashioned image of a Scottish soldier. We are talking about Camp Coffee. Camp Coffee is a product that has been around since 1876. To give you some context, that is the same year the telephone was patented. Originally, it was marketed to military men who couldn't brew fresh coffee in the field. It was a marvel of convenience for the Victorian era. But today, it sits on the baking aisle, and quite frankly, that is exactly where it should stay, hidden inside a cake. Camp is technically a coffee and chicory essence. If you aren't familiar with chicory, it is a woody plant root that was historically used during wars and economic depressions to stretch out coffee supplies when real beans were too expensive or unavailable. It has a very distinctive earthy, woody taste that does not taste like a flat white. It tastes like, well, roots. The problem with camp coffee as a beverage in the 21st century is the composition. If you look at the ingredients, the first item is usually sugar. It is effectively a coffee-flavored sugar syrup. When you try to make a hot drink with this, you aren't brewing coffee, you are diluting a concentrate. It lacks the essential oils, the body, and the aromatic complexity of real coffee beans. The flavor profile is overwhelmingly sweet, followed immediately by that strange, savory, woody hit of the chicory. It doesn't have the acidity or the fruitiness of a bean. It has the dull thud of wood shavings. If you drink this black, it is syrupy and sickly. If you drink it with milk, it tastes like a children's drink gone wrong. We have to give credit where it is due. Camp Coffee is legendary for making coffee walnut cake. The sugar content and the strong flavor survive the baking process perfectly. But we aren't judging baking ingredients today. We are judging coffee you drink. And if you are reaching for this bottle at 8 a.m. hoping for a sophisticated caffeine fix, you are going to be sorely disappointed. You are drinking history. And unfortunately, history tastes like sweet wood. Now let's leave the baking aisle and head back to the bottom shelf of the instant coffee section for our next defender. A brand that represents the absolute race to the bottom in terms of price and quality.
Let's finish up our tour of the supermarket shelf with offender number 4, Maxwell House. Specifically, we are looking at the powdered instant variety. In the United States, Maxwell House is a budget staple, famously good to the last drop. But here in the UK, it occupies a very specific territory on the supermarket shelf, the bottom shelf. This is the coffee you buy when you are counting pennies, but as we are about to see, it is often a false economy. The first major red flag with Maxwell House powder is the texture. Unlike the chunky, gold freeze-dried crystals you might see in better brands, this is a fine, reddish-brown dust. It looks disturbingly like cocoa powder. We've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. Processing coffee into a fine powder maximizes the surface area exposed to oxygen. Oxygen is the enemy of flavor. This means that even before you open the jar, the coffee inside has likely oxidized significantly, losing whatever vibrant notes it might have once had. The flavor profile is incredibly flat. While Nescafé Original is aggressive and bitter, Maxwell House powder is often described as cardboard or muddy. There is zero acidity, zero fruitiness, and zero complexity. It is just a brown, monotonous liquid. It doesn't challenge your palate, but it doesn't reward it either. It just exists. It is the beige paint of the coffee world. Many consumers report that it has a weak body, meaning you have to use 2 or 3 heaping teaspoons just to get a drink that looks like coffee rather than dirty water. By the time you've used that much powder, you are burning through the jar twice as fast. So while the sticker price is low, the cost per decent cup is actually higher than buying a better brand. It represents the worst of mass-produced coffee, a product designed purely for price point, stripping away all the joy and ritual of coffee drinking. It is a functional caffeine delivery system that barely functions. If you value your morning routine, spending the extra 50 pence for a freeze-dried option makes a world of difference. So we have covered the instant offenders lurking in your kitchen, but what happens when you leave the house? What happens when you are walking down the high street, desperate for a caffeine fix? Unfortunately, paying £5 for a coffee doesn't guarantee quality. In fact, some of the biggest names on the high street are some of the worst offenders. Let's head outside for number 5.
We are leaving the supermarket now. We are walking down the high street. You need a coffee on the go, and you see the familiar green siren. This brings us to offender number 5, Starbucks. Now, I know what you are thinking. Starbucks is everywhere. It is the most successful coffee chain on the planet. And to be fair, if you're ordering a pumpkin spice latte or a frappuccino, you aren't really buying coffee. You're buying a delicious, sugary dessert. But we are talking about the coffee itself. If you walk into a UK Starbucks and order a standard filter coffee or a plain black Americano, you are going to experience what industry experts have long referred to as charbucks. Starbucks intentionally roasts their beans incredibly dark. This is a strategic business decision. They do this for consistency. If you burn the beans, they taste exactly the same in London as they do in New York or Tokyo. But that taste is burnt. The roasting process is so aggressive that it destroys the unique nuances of the bean, the floral notes, the fruitiness, the acidity. They are all incinerated and replaced with a heavy, ashy flavor profile. This is why so many people feel the need to load their Starbucks drinks with syrup. They are masking the taste of charcoal. For a specialist coffee shop, the actual quality of the bean they serve in their standard cup is surprisingly low on the quality spectrum. But if Starbucks is consistent, our next offender is chaos. Number 6 is the Costa Express machine. Please note, we are not talking about the Costa cafes with actual baristas. We are talking about those self-serve, touchscreen monoliths found in petrol stations, convenience stores, and motorway services across the UK. These machines are a game of Russian roulette with your taste buds. While the technology inside them is impressive, the quality relies entirely on the maintenance performed by the shop staff. And that is where the horror story begins. Often, the beans in the hopper at the top have been sitting there, exposed to the air and the fluorescent lights for weeks. This makes them oily and rancid. Even worse are the milk lines. If the machine hasn't been cleaned rigorously, and let's be honest, the person working the night shift at the petrol station has other priorities, you risk getting a cup of coffee with a sour, fermented tang. The result is often a scalding hot cup of bitter water, or in the worst case scenario, milk that tastes slightly off. It is the desperate option for the motorway driver at 2 a.m., but as a coffee experience, it's mechanical, often stale, and rarely satisfying. We have covered the homebrew and the high street, but we aren't done yet. For our final section of offenders, we need to scrape the absolute bottom of the barrel. We are going back to the store to look at the brands that shouldn't even legally be called coffee. These are the budget nightmares. We are back in the supermarket aisle, but this time we are looking at the very bottom shelf, the dust zone. This brings us to offender number 7, the generic supermarket's value brands. You know the ones I mean. They usually have names that sound vaguely traditional, but are actually just invented brands for the store's budget line, like Tesco's Stockwell & Co. or Sainsbury's Hubbard's Food Store. These jars cost barely £1, and there is a reason for that. These are almost guaranteed to be 100% low-grade Robusta dust. They are functional in the most brutal sense of the word. They are high in caffeine, sure, but they are incredibly harsh on the stomach. The acidity is uncontrolled, and the flavor is non-existent. Drinking this is like drinking hot brown gravel. They are known to cause the dreaded coffee jitters without providing any of the pleasure of a good taste. Unless you are a university student pulling an all-nighter with zero budget, these should be avoided at all costs. Offender number 8 is a wolf in sheep's clothing, the skinny or cappuccino instant sachets. You've seen these boxes. They promise a coffee shop-style cappuccino in a packet. But let's look at the ingredients. This isn't coffee, it is a chemistry set. In almost every major brand of these sachets, the first ingredient is sugar or glucose syrup. The second is usually hydrogenated vegetable oil or coconut fat. Coffee is often the 4th or 5th ingredient on the list, making up sometimes less than 15% of the powder. When you drink this, you aren't drinking coffee. You are drinking hot, coffee-scented oil and sugar water. The texture is slimy, the sweetness is artificial, and the nutritional value is shocking. If you want a cappuccino, buy some milk and a whisk. Do not drink the powder. Finally, we arrive at offender number 9, the high-caffeine novelty brands. These are the brands you often see advertised on social media with names like Death Wish, Rocket Fuel, or Insomnia. They market themselves on being the world's strongest coffee. They achieve this not through quality, but by selecting the absolute strongest, harshest Robusta beans available and roasting them to oblivion. It's a gimmick. Yes, it will wake you up, but in the same way a slap in the face wakes you up. The taste is often compared to battery acid or burnt rubber tires. Good coffee should be about balance and flavor notes, not about giving you heart palpitations and anxiety. If a coffee brand has to scream about how dangerous it is, it's usually because it tastes terrible. So there you have it. We have traversed the landscape of bad coffee, from the dusty jars of mellow dirds to the burnt beans of the high streets and the chemical sachets of the budget aisle. But it's not all doom and gloom. We can't leave you here. We need to talk about the solution. How do you actually get a good cup? Let's wrap this up. So, we have successfully traversed the landscape of bad coffee. We have slogged through the dusty, oxidized jars of mellow birds. We have endured the burnt charcoal flavors of the high street giants. And we have exposed the chemical reality of those sugary cappuccino sachets. It has been a dark journey. And if you are currently looking at your mug with suspicion, I don't blame you. But this video isn't just about complaining. It is about elevating your morning ritual. The UK actually has one of the most vibrant, exciting coffee scenes in the world right now, if you just know where to look. You don't have to be a coffee snob to drink better, and you don't even have to spend more money. If you are strictly a supermarket shopper and you need that instant fix, the rule is simple. Ignore the powder and look for freeze-dried. Brands like Dow Egberts or Kenco, while still mass-produced, use the freeze-drying method, which preserves significantly more flavor and smoothness than the spray-dried red jars we discussed earlier. It is a small upgrade that makes a massive difference to your palate. If you are on the high street, look past the big green siren. If you need a chain, places like Pret a Manger often rotate their filter coffee much more frequently, meaning you get a fresher cup that hasn't been scorched. But better yet, look for the smaller guys. The UK is full of independent coffee shops now, from small local roasters to boutique chains like Watch House or Notes. These places treat coffee as a culinary product, not just fuel. And finally, if you really want to change your life, buy a cafetiere, a French press. You can pick one up for a $5. Buy a bag of ground coffee from a local roaster or even the single origin aisle in a supermarket. For the price of just 2 or 3 cups of burnt takeaway coffee, you can buy a whole bag of beans that taste like chocolate, berries, or caramel. Life is simply too short to drink bad coffee. It is the fuel that powers our days, the comfort in our hands on a cold morning, and the ritual that brings us together. Don't waste that moment on brown water that tastes like sadness. Go to your cupboard, check the labels, and if you see any of the offenders we named today, maybe it's time to pour them down the sink and treat yourself to something that doesn't taste like regret. Thanks for listening. Drink better,